1, 2, is this on? Welcome to another answer to the age-old question of, do you know what really burns my ass? The way American courts handle the sentencing of guilty defendants. I don't want to get political on here if I can help it, so let's take a look at some verdicts, sentencing laws from America's past. I also don't want to fall into the trap of applying modern morality to the past norms, so this may be controversial. I'm going to start with a book that came out in 1916 entitled Slavery of Prostitution, A Plea for Emancipation by Maude Hadden. Hadden was a probation officer in New York, the first woman to hold that position for the magistrate court. From 1907 to 1909, she served in the night court. Hadden was educated at Smith College and also Columbia University. The things she witnessed in the New York Night Court led her to activism. She saw the same women come through the court prosecuted for prostitution over and over again. To understand what she witnessed, we have to go back a little bit further in history. In 1897, the New York Police Commissioner Frank Moss argued, quote, criminal instincts are often found naturally in the Russian and Polish Jews, unquote. In addition, in 1908, the New York Police Commissioner at that time was Theodore Bingham, and he claimed that half of all crime was committed by Jews, even though the actual statistic was about 16.4%. A Tribune article in 1905 claimed there were 10,000 Jewish bigamists in New York's East Side District. The article claimed that 90% of the Jewish community didn't realize that divorce was a legal matter and not the responsibility of the rabbi, but it went on to say this was a moral failing, not a legal misunderstanding. An investigative journalist named George Turner wrote a number of articles claiming that it was standard for Jewish families to prostitute the daughters to finance the education of the sons. Turner argued that Jewish women were incapable of being a white slavery victim because that emphasized the destruction of purity and innocence in the victim, while Turner believed a Jewish woman lacked the virtue necessary to be such a victim. So basically, everything was awful for Jewish women in New York at this time. Coming back to Maude Hadden, she started to recognize the same bondsmen keeping the same women out of jail after being declared guilty of prostitution over and over again. She started keeping a private record because there wasn't an official one kept. Legally, anyone could post bond for anyone at that time. So Hadden offered bond for one of the repeat offenders, and this angered the bondsman. Hadden had come to suspect that the bondsmen were forcing the convicts into prostitution to pay legal fees, turning the court into a revolving door of profit. Eventually, Hadden had taken responsibility for so many women, she and her sister Stella opened Waverly House for Girls in 1908. This was a halfway house for young women, including people released by the courts to her via bond or runaways seeking shelter. She interviewed the inhabitants, taught them Victorian sexual ethics, but as well as trades such as sewing, housework, and hat making, so they could seek safe employment. Something I don't have in my teleprompter I want to add that I remember. A third of the women that she rescued through this method tested positive for sexually transmitted infections at the time. So this was also for their medical safety as well as for their legal, moral, and emotional safety. Now, while this is kind of a happy ending to this part of the story, I think it's equally important to realize just how we got there. The laws of the time assumed that people of certain races were simply predispositioned to certain crimes. The law then allowed people to pay to take responsibility for those criminals. And when the criminal came back to court, that was the fault of the individual before the court, not the fault of the one the court turned the criminal over to, for care. I'm sure you can tell what word I'm struggling not to say in this description. We Americans tend to think of slavery as a wealthy southern white man buying a black man to do hard labor, perhaps in a field. But here there were male bankers effectively buying women from the court and forcing them into prostitution to pay those fines. Prostitution that led to their arrest, which led to them to court, where the same man could buy them again and keep the cycle running. And this was long after the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865. In fact, Maude Hadden was born 15 years after that ratification, and she was the one instrumental in exposing and ending this practice in New York. This is what I mean by looking at history and keeping the mores of the time in mind. Slavery was long outlawed when this exposure happened. We as a society knew it was wrong to let a wealthy and influential person purchase another person. Practice had been outlawed for around 50 years by the time all this came to light. It's often said that people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And again, I'm trying really hard not to claim a parallel to anything happening in current day. Just going to end by saying it's important to know this was happening, when it happened, and what the eventual outcome was.